the Qatari gift to the Trump administration is right now, anyway, a leapfrogging a lot of other stories in Washington just because it seems like such an obvious violation of every even generous interpretation of the Emoluments Clause, which prohibits foreign governments from making donations like this without congressional approval. Of course, there was no congressional approval here. He got the high five from Pam Bondi, and he moved on and accepted this, at least in principle. Give me a thought on this and where this is going.
Well, is this a huge deal? To some people, it will be. I've honestly, to many in Washington, even people frustrated in the Democratic Party, Mark, this is just going to be seen as another distraction from what they believe are the issues that they really have got to focus on, right? Things like potential large cuts to Medicaid, things like that. Amy Klobuchar said this over the weekend, said, look, we got to quit focusing on the bright, shiny objects that aren't the main story. So I think this is sort of a mixed bag, even again for the Democrats in Congress. But Trump still, hey, why would I turn down a $400 million free jet? And of course, the irony of the whole thing is that Boeing just can't seem to get its act together and get those two new Air Force Ones off the ground. This would all be a moot point if they'd been able to keep to that time. Now people go back and, well, was there too many change orders from Trump? Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, we may have another new, they're calling it temporary Air Force One. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you make such a good point, and you're so sharp to point to Klobuchar, who made that point, that these distractions of a sort take us away from some of the main plot points as Medicare, Medicaid is undermined, and as there are huge economic issues associated with tariffs and this kind of thing. Yet the total compromise and ethical compromise that is this administration really is on display in splendiferous form with this Qatari thing. So from that standpoint, it's a reminder of, frankly, the corruption of this administration. These are my words, not yours, but that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I understand, Mark. And, look, you can bet your life on this. If this thing does actually touch down and get a coat of paint, from the Air Force One, paint store, every single tiny act between us and Qatar you can just imagine, are going to be scrutinized to the T for the remainder of this administration and beyond. So, I think right now the guys in Qatar have to be saying, well, get ready for the gigantic microscope to be on every single thing that we do from here on out, because that will be happening.
Tell me about the tariffs. So they have weekend meetings in Geneva, the Americans and the Chinese, and they essentially hit the reset button. So now it's a 90-day pause. This won't be a relief of all import fees, tariffs. Steel, aluminum, I think, is still included. They're like 50%, something like that. But everything else drops way, way down again and sort of normalizes everything, gets things back to where they were prior to this whole tariff mess beginning. Give me some thoughts on that.
Well, this is the big kahuna. I mean, the announcement last week about the, new agreement between the UK and the US, that was significant. That just sort of started the drip flowing, right? But this was the one everybody was waiting on. Was something significant going to come out of this? And it's not small, as you point out, Mark. I mean, our tariffs are supposedly the general tariffs, dropping from that whopping 145% to 35%. China dropping theirs down commensurate to, I think, 15%. From there, over 100. So this is a big deal, and mostly it's a big deal for Wall Street. Look at the stock market today, right? This is what Wall Street was waiting for. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Basically their question was very simple. Is the 145 nothing more than a Donald Trump negotiating ploy to get China to the table and really talk about redoing the agreement or not? And now we know the answer to that is yes. I mean, I don't think there was, and he's been kind of saying this over the last weekend, well, 145, it may not stay there. And then he said maybe 90. I think this was nothing more than a strong arm public tactic to really try to redo the whole China trade negotiation platform. And we'll see what happens. I mean, then obviously the next 90 days are going to be the proof of it. But in the short and medium term, Wall Street's real happy about it.
Sure, sure. I mean, Wall Street would have liked Trump to worry about making announcements about plastic straws and not touch the economy at all. It was already in pretty good shape. And it's funny, we're looking at, when you talk about getting China back to the table and work out some kind of trade agreement. I mean, there was a trade agreement in place, and who made that trade agreement with China? It was Donald Trump in 2018, I think. So the idea somehow that, you know, the entire notion about what's happening with China has some truth to it, right? There is IP robbery going on. I mean, China is aggressive about closing us out of markets. So this is not a completely empty notion that you have to work something out with China on an ongoing basis, okay? And with AI now part of the picture, et cetera, it all makes sense. But what Trump did is just way, way bizarre, over the top lunacy, really. I mean, and it's not just me saying that. I mean, every economist on earth was saying it. And of course, as you've pointed out, Wall Street reflects it in what's happening in the markets. So I'll be interested to see if after 90 days, Trump just leaves it alone. You would think that that might be the case, right? I mean, it's sort of like...
Yeah, Mark, I think you're making a really, really important, outstanding point that people need to tune into. A lot of these negotiations are going to have nothing to do with tariffs. To be honest about it, a lot of the business people in the United States believe that the other types of things you mentioned, stealing of intellectual property, I mean, trying again to elbow the U.S. out of the way in other markets, trying to pressure other countries to not do business with the U.S. Those are the kinds of things that I think U.S. business is far more concerned about than whether it's 10 or 15% tariffs. I mean, these are the big game changers, AI, things like that. So I think you're exactly right that honestly, as fast as things are moving these days in the business world and in the intellectual property world and the technology world, 5 years, as you know, is like a century these days. So there's been a lot of water under the bridge since that last Trump-China agreement. And then I think you also, finally, Mark, you need to put it in the broader context of the clear right now escalation of superpower, moxie between China and the U.S. I mean, this is part of what Trump's talking about almost every week, right? I mean, all of a sudden over the weekend, there's a giant announcement that the U.S. Army is going to get these brand new tilt rotor airplanes that are going to replace our helicopter fleet. Why? Because they say that's totally aimed at China and the Pacific, that we've got to have machines that can be used for potential defense and assault that have to surpass the capabilities of average choppers. So I'm just saying across the board, right? I mean, the new fighter jets, this is part of a much larger picture of who's going to emerge 20, 30 years from now as the dominant superpower.
Wow. So well said. Not every economist thought, okay, thank you, Jack. Virtually every economist thought that the tariffs were a bad idea. It's interesting, you can get so caught up in the China thing. And boy, when you lay it out like that and you talk about what's, potential theaters of war and around Taiwan, et cetera, and how we're maybe altering our fighting force and altering our hardware to accommodate that, you can lose sight of the fact that there is a huge vulnerability that has now been established in America with the cybersecurity being underfunded now. I mean, a bunch of cybersecurity experts have been dismissed from the government as part of the DOGE decapitation of so many agencies in government. We've lost a lot in that area. I'm wondering if you're thinking, it seems so obvious you need to rebuild in that area. I mean, in a way, that's the real ongoing theater of war in every country. Why wouldn't you rebuild those cybersecurity posts and try to make us robust in that area?
I think that's going to happen, Mark. Frankly, I think when you talk about DOGE, to be really honest about it, it's in many senses. I think if you look at the numbers now, and let's check them again in 4 years, I think there's going to be a lot of rehires into some of these jobs, but they're not going to be quote unquote Biden folks, right? I mean, I think you could almost see it more as a purge than it is a cutback. Does that make any sense? It's like reframing. It's what's happening in the Pentagon. The Pentagon budget is not being cut; it's being increased. But it is. But a lot of the deck chairs and substantial ones are being moved around and reframed in some significant ways. You know that the Trump people believe is absolutely imperative. For example, shipbuilding. Who cares about shipbuilding? We're not taking on the British Navy like we did 150 years ago. It's aimed at one place. We all know where that is. This is clear competition with China. That's what the shipbuilding is about on the commercial fleets as well as the military fleets. So make no mistake about it. You know, I think I think we really have to look at this in the big picture sometimes and say, oh, that cybersecurity thing's not going away, but it's going to be even more trained on places like China, Russia, Iran, etc.
I want to ask you about California here in the last second or two, but before I do, these other things that are happening, well, they're happening in the military. Since we're talking about the military, the elimination of trans military members, there's also kind of there was also an administration, I don't want to say edict, but message to somehow incentivize women having more kids. There seems to be like this old school kind of view of the world that may crescendo with the trans issue, but also seems to include stuff that's associated with race and gender and just old school visions of those things. I wonder if you can give me a second on that.
Well, I would just say, you know, when it comes to the military, Hegseth has continued to use this phrase over time. We are about one thing, lethality, right? So in their view, Mark, if it doesn't serve that purpose directly, you know, if it's about anything related to equality or equal opportunity, whatever, that is not part of their calculus. I mean, they've made that clear. You know, people can vociferously disagree with that, but that's the bottom line.
All right, now to California. One of the things that's happened in California is we've talked about, and you follow Sacramento quite closely, which is where the state capital is, for those who are tuning in from all around. The idea somehow that California might, on some level, pick up the slack of medical research that has been discontinued at NIH and those official agencies. That bill, at least preliminarily, got through the Sacramento vote. So I'm wondering now, I mean, it has still another vote to come, I think, and you know all about how that works. But I wonder if you can speak to the realities, because there are a lot of academic institutions in California that depend or depended on that federal money, and we're doing critical research in cancer and Alzheimer's and all these other things, and they may get back to it if the state funds it.
Well, the state has funded in the past different kinds of medical efforts completely separate and apart from the federal government. But yet, you know, understand that, for example, right around the state capitol, and with a couple of miles of it, there's a new biomedical campus going up right next to the new Golden One Center. University of California is going to invest heavily in that. I mean, there are already, Mark, a lot of public-private partnerships that are escalating in California dramatically. There's been this sense for some time that there is a growing desire to basically replicate Silicon Valley and turn it into biomedical valley, you know, both in a certain segment of the Bay Areas. You know, San Francisco has a portion of this near the new Chase Center, et cetera. But even in the Central Valley, that there's going to be major league, even international investments that California would like to be, and right now is kind of taking a leadership role and being the center of, regardless of what the federal government does in the short term.
It's interesting because California is running out of money, right? I mean, there's a little bit of a problem and a shortfall when it comes to funds, and this would be quite a capital commitment, wouldn't it?
Well, you know, it could happen. Some of this could be put on the ballot. Some of it may just be in this form, Mark, of, you know, land grants or, you know, tax rebates or, you know, tax credits, those kinds of things that are direct expenditures out of the general fund.
Now, last question, I'll double back, but it ties into what we've just finished speaking about. I'll double back to the Trump administration and the announcement. There are a lot of announcements. Trump is a big one for announcements and pronouncements. As you know, the theater of the presidency, in my view, is really where he's happiest. And he announced and signed an executive order asking pharmaceutical companies to voluntarily bring their pricing in some conformity with the rest of the world. We pay more for pharmaceuticals here in this country than any other place. So I think this is just that. It's performative. I mean, there was already, I'll just, in my preamble to your reply, remind everyone that there was already negotiation on the part of the government in the infrastructure package with 10 different major pharmaceutical offerings. I think one of them was for diabetes and so on. So it was already there, and Trump rescinded it. Trump rescinded the Biden era accomplishment of negotiating with these pharmaceutical companies. Now, doing the same dance as Biden, saying we pay too much here, he's saying, I want these pharmaceutical companies to bring their prices down to what they are the rest of the world. I think, first of all, they're not going to voluntarily do it. This is my opinion. But I also think it feels theatrical to me. It feels performative. I don't know if anything will happen. But again, you know where the bodies are buried. What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's both and, Mark. I think, the proposal is that we would pay on an individual basis for an individual drug, the lowest price paid by any other country for that drug. Now, it is important for people to understand that we still pay 2 to 3 times, was reported again over the weekend, what other developed countries pay, and sometimes up to 10 times what a developing nation might pay for the same drug. And I think Trump is, to me, this is sort of like 145% Chinese tariff. Is that going to happen voluntarily by these pharmaceutical companies? Of course it isn't. There's absolutely no way it isn't. But to me, it's the shot across the bow. And I can expect a follow-up. It was signed today. Bobby Kennedy was there, to receive the executive order. I think this is going to be some hard-nosed negotiations. And part of that's going to be, look, if you don't do this, and then fill in the blank after that, right? There's going to be tax penalties. There's going to be all kinds of things. But I think Trump is serious about this. This just plays into the larger thing of the U.S. is getting screwed vis-a-vis everybody else, right? Trump is like, I am not going to have my people pay 2 or 3 times what England is paying for the same drug. And so the mechanism right now, pressure everybody, pressure the other countries, pressure the major pharmaceutical companies. But those companies are huge donors, as you know, in Congress, Mark.
Thank you. That's why I think it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's going to be the challenge. If there's congressional approval needed for some of this, getting it past Big Pharma is going to be tough.
Well, we agree then. We agree. But we'll see. And I think it's interesting that you kind of point out, hey, this is a warning shot. I'd say it's maybe part warning shot based on what you're saying. I mean, I think you make a convincing argument for that. And also, it's part, as I say, attention getter. Like, I'm a man of the people. I'm a populist. I'm a populist president. It's all, he's trying to build that brand with that announcement. But Gary, I love our time together. I'll only miss you one Monday. So just, and then I'm back with you. So looking forward to our conversations. Always, you can find Gary Dietrich across iHeart Radio and across the CBS television stations. And on Mondays, he hangs out with us a little bit. So we love it. Thank you, pal. Appreciate it.
Of course, Mark. Talk to you soon.
Gary Dietrich, everybody. Right on. And Gary is brought to us by Bill Campbell. Good enough to sponsor Gary's segment. Bill Campbell is in Northern California, and if you're thinking of relocating to Northern California, or if you're in Northern California, thinking of moving out of Northern California, and you want a highly respected real estate professional, Bill Campbell is that guy. Reach him at RE/MAX Gold. You can call or even text him 530-448-7474. 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell, RE/MAX Gold. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.